Welcome back to the Haddonfield Survivor Retrospectives. We have now reached Haddonfield Survivor 5, also known as Heroes vs. Villains. This season took place on August 8th, 2020, the same summer as Season 4, and this was a really hyped up season. Obviously, it's an all-star season with the Heroes vs. Villains theme. There was a lot of hype about who's going to be on the cast, seeing all these really big players from the first 4 seasons playing together. Who's going to be a hero, who's going to be a villain. It was a lot of fun planning this one. Now, obviously, the first 4 seasons all had, other than Season 1, they all had returning players. But, Seasons 1 and 2 don't really count. And Season 3 and 4 really didn't have that many returning players. It was about a third on both of those seasons, maybe less on Season 4 even. So yeah, for Season 5, full-blown all-star season, let's talk about the cast. So, returning from Season 1, and we only had 4 of the Season 1 people. We had Oshin, Evan, and Jane, the 3 finalists, plus Sam, who has not been back yet. He was only on Season 1. He didn't do a whole lot, but he did find the first idol ever, so... And he's Sam, He was a fun person. He was kind of an alternate because there were a couple people we couldn't get, and I'll talk about those people also. So, from Season 1, we wanted Declan, obviously the first winner. He was unavailable. Dan was also supposed to be on this season, which would have been funny, because that would have meant he would have been on all 5 seasons. However, Dan also dropped out at the last second, so we were supposed to have Dan and Declan, probably not Sam. But yeah, obviously Evan is also the winner of Season 2, so we did get 3 out of the 4 winners. From Season 2, the only Season 2 new player that would have been on was Mackay, but he couldn't make it, unfortunately. So Season 3 and Season 4 make up the bulk of this cast. We only really have a couple people from those original seasons. But these 2 seasons are overrepresented, and seeing these 2 seasons combined into one with all the best players from both of them was really fun, because these were 2 amazing seasons with a lot of great cast members. So returning from Season 3, we had the winner in Max, runners-up Caleb and Harry, 5th place and the second best player of the season we had Ian. We have Ben, obviously, 6th place, went against Max. Ted, 7th place, blindsided by Max. And then, obviously, we also have Jane and Evan, who were 4th and 8th place. I've already stated, because they were in Season 1. But then some of the more unconventional picks, I guess, were Chris and Mary, who didn't have great showings on Season 3. And obviously, Chris was on 4 also, and also didn't have a great showing. So they were some of the more questionable all-stars. But with people like Declan and Mackay not able to make it, and Dan, that left some spots open for people like them. We basically had everyone that made the merge on Season 3, almost entirely. Same thing with Season 4. We basically had the entire group of people that made the merge on Season 4, excluding Dan, who we were supposed to have. But yeah, we had the final 3, Cyrus, Jason, Isaac, and then the rest of the people that made the merge. Elliot, Will, Evan, Samir... Basically all the important players. And yeah, let's get into the pre-season dynamics, because obviously we got some groups here. We've got the Season 4 Class of 2022 group. All 5 of them are back. They did betray each other last season, so that's going to be an interesting dynamic. But they're a pretty solid group here. Chris and Isaac are sort of associated with them, however, they also have some beef too. Ben kind of gets lumped in with that group because he's obviously friends with them, but he's from Season 3. Then over on the left, we have the Jane, Evan, Oshin, Mary, kind of Caleb group. We obviously have Max and Ian, who we then add in Elliot from Season 4. They're all kind of together. Elliot kind of is associated with Sam and Ted. Ted obviously is with Harry. There's a lot of loose connections throughout, you can see, but yeah, pretty interesting dynamics. But let's get into the crux of this season, which obviously is the tribes, the heroes and the villains. And as Max Cass once said, the villains are the really good players and the heroes are the other players who made it really far. Which isn't entirely true. I do think Ian at this point was a really good player. Jane's debatably a good player too, and some of these players become good players, like Chris and Elliot, but largely the heroes were a collection of the other players that made it pretty far into the game, and we'll talk about the heroes. So, on the heroes tribe, we have Jane, Caleb, Elliot, Ian, Evan, Samir, Chris, Jason, and Isaac. Some pretty interesting dynamics. A lot of Season 4 people, other than Jane, Ian, and Caleb. It's mostly Season 4 people, but not a lot of people who worked together. Obviously, Isaac and Chris are separate from the Class of 22 people, and Elliot's also separate. Now, we were supposed to have 20 people, not 19, so the last spot on this tribe was supposed to be Dan, but sadly we couldn't get Dan. That would have been interesting, though. Over on the villains, and the villains are, as Max said, the good players, which is kind of true. I mean, Harry and Ted and Sam, questionable if they're good players, but they definitely had some drama, so that's more why they're villains. And yes, Evan was supposed to be on this tribe. However, with it only being 19 people, someone had to skip the first round, and I believe it was randomized, and it became Evan, so... which is actually good, because Evan's, debatably, a hero or a villain, so he got to join the tribe that lost the first challenge, which was the heroes. But let's go over the villains. So, on the villains, we had Cyrus and Will, Mary, Max, Ted, Oisin, Sam, Harry, and Ben. And of course, a lot of these players aren't actually villainous. They're just strong players that make cutthroat decisions, like Cyrus and Ben, Mary, Will. They're not actually villains. I mean, Harry, Ted, debatably, but, mostly not villains in real life, just in the game of Survivor. But yeah, that's the tribes. Let's get into the first round. So, the first challenge was a relay race. However, it was a little different this season. We had one person from each tribe run out and grab a ball that they had to find. And naturally, it was Samir and Cyrus, one from each tribe. And then, once they did that, the rest of their team would do a puzzle. And what do you know? The villains won. I don't even remember if the heroes even got to the puzzle. Cyrus is proving again that he's the superior twin. Unfortunate for Samir. But, yeah, villains win immunity. Evan will join the heroes after they go to the first tribal council. So, the heroes tribe. Let's talk about the dynamics. The dynamics here are really interesting. So, obviously the 22 people, it's Samir, Jason, and Evan, and they don't really have any beef with each other from last season. These aren't really the strongest players in the world. They're friends outside of the game. The three of them are gonna stick together. You also have Elliot and Ian, who obviously are from different seasons, but they're friends in real life, so it makes sense why they're together. And they pretty much have Caleb and Jane with them. I mean, Jane and Elliot get along really well. Jane and Caleb get along. Caleb and Ian. It's really like two sides. You got the Class of 22 side, and then the Elliot-Ian group. Chris and Isaac are placed in the middle, and this is kind of just the spot they fell into, but they make the most, well, Chris makes the most of this position and actually plays pretty well here on the Heroes tribe. So, the Class of 2022 group tries to grab Isaac because, I mean, Jason sort of has a relationship with Isaac, and Isaac's not going to work with Elliot. However, Chris still wants to stay in the middle, so he sort of agrees to that plan. However, he also makes a pretty strong bond with Elliot and Ian. I mean, he doesn't have a bad relationship with them. He hasn't really gotten to play with them, so... and he has a good relationship with Jane, I guess. So, Chris gets to be in the best spot in this tribe. He's basically in the middle, and he does a good job not becoming the target of both sides. Because, I mean, there was a real possibility that, Evan could have linked up with Elliot, and then Chris and Isaac could have been an easy target. But no, that doesn't happen. Chris makes a good relationship with Ian and Elliot. But yeah, at this point, Isaac debatably wants to go with the 22 people, but Chris wants to go with Elliot's group. However, Evan Lapid finds the idol. And I'm just going to go on a tangent here about the idols. So, there were actually a lot more idols this season. So, each tribe had its normal idol, but each tribe also had a special idol, a hero idol and a villain idol. So, Evan doesn't find the regular idol, he finds the hero idol. And the hero idol allows you to play the idol on two people. However, you can't play it on yourself. It's like you're making a heroic act by playing it on two other people. You can play it on just one person, though, if you want to. But yeah, so Evan has this idol. There are three of them, so they don't know who's going to get voted for. They also... I'm pretty sure they knew that Chris was siding with the other group, as they do play the idol, so they knew they were in trouble. So Evan ends up playing the idol on Jason and Samir. I don't know if he knew that he was getting votes or not. I'm pretty sure he didn't know. I'm pretty sure they didn't know anything about where the votes were going. But the Elliot group ends up voting for Evan. Lucky them. Because if they had voted for one of the other two, then Ian would have gone home here, which is pretty crazy. However, Evan ends up voting for Jason, which is a little weird, and I don't get that. Same with Isaac. So I feel like Elliot and Chris kind of pulled some maneuver here to get there to be a split vote, and the entire class of 22 group on the Heroes tribe is just a complete mess, proving that they're not that good of players. Evan misplays the idol. Evan and Isaac are kind of being manipulated here. Jason gets votes. It's a shit show. But yeah, Evan doesn't play the idol right. He goes home. And, Evan plays poorly here. He's manipulated by Elliot. He misplays the idol. He's on the bottom. He's not able to pull in Chris or Isaac, really. So, not much good to say here. Evan's not a great player. And this is the last time we see Evan, so pretty sad way to end his journey. But yeah, that's Evan on Season 5. So we now head into the second round of the game, and this is where we get the sort of more traditional relay race, actually. There's a little bit of a twist here, though. Before everyone runs, they have to spin around on a bat and get really dizzy. And this is really funny. Harry's really good at it. Will's really bad at it. But the villains still end up winning here, starting a losing streak for the heroes. The heroes kind of a mess this season. But they do have Evan now, so that'll add a new dynamic. But yeah, villains dominating the challenges. And we go to a hero tribe tribal council yet again. So with Evan Lapid gone and Evan Mangelli now added to the tribe, this is even worse for our class of 22 heroes, Samir and Jason now just completely being on the bottom. They sort of have Isaac, but even Chris doesn't really want to go with them, and even if he had, it's like, that's not even a majority. So yeah, Jason becomes the target, not Samir, which I guess makes sense because Jason did better last season. However, Jason's not really that good. He doesn't try very hard this round, and it just seems like it's a foregone conclusion that Jason's going to get voted out. However, it's also debatable. They should have split the votes here. I don't know why they didn't do that. Maybe they thought there was only one idol, and that Evan had wasted it last round. But they choose not to split the votes. They vote out Jason. Samir even votes for Jason because he's probably afraid there's a split vote. And yeah, Jason gets voted out 8-1, and Jason wasn't that good on this season. I still don't think Jason's a terrible player. He's just really passive. He didn't really do much to try to better his position, even though it wasn't that good in the first place. He gets voted for at both tribals, so, there's not that much good to say about Jason. But yeah, still think he's a player with potential. However, pretty passive, not much else to say. Moving on. Going into the third round of the game, we get the Trivia Challenge, and what do you know? The Villains tribe, full of a bunch of smart people, wins this challenge. The Heroes' losing streak continues, and this next tribal is not that interesting, but it has some interesting things about it. So you'd think that Samir would just be a dead man right here. He doesn't have an idol. He is all alone. However, he ends up surviving this tribal, which I actually think is pretty good for him. I think Samir is an underrated player. I feel like Samir's largely been dealt a bad hand in Haddonfield Survivor history. He hasn't had the best starting tribes, and he's just been outshined by his brother, but I actually don't think he's that bad of a player, and has a lot of potential, honestly. And he proves it this round by staying. So I'm pretty sure what happened in this round is that Samir started pitching Isaac, and I think that's a good decision, because Isaac and Chris are obviously together, but Elliot and Ian are working with Chris, and maybe they think Isaac's just an extra number for him. They might want to get rid of that number. And this works relatively well because Elliot actually listens to him, and Elliot and Ian decide it's actually time to vote out Isaac. And Chris disagrees, obviously. He doesn't want to vote out Isaac, but for some reason he doesn't suggest Samir, and Isaac and Chris start targeting Evan, which is a little weird. Maybe because he was added onto the tribe late and thinks that Jane and Evan are a duo. I don't know. But Samir still goes with the Isaac plan instead of the Evan plan, which, I don't know. I could take it or leave it. It's an move. I see why he wouldn't trust Chris, though. But yeah. Samir, Ian, Elliot, Evan, and Jane vote out Isaac. For some reason, Caleb votes for Evan here, which, Caleb listens to Chris a lot during the season, so I guess they probably had a really good relationship, honestly. So kudos to Chris for picking up a number, but yeah, he does lose Isaac here, and Isaac continues to be Isaac. He's kind of a weird player. During this season, I mean, he should have been positioned a little bit better. The fact that he goes home here instead of Samir is kind of bad. And like Jason, he's just like a passive player that's just loyal and follows people. So not a whole lot to say about Isaac. He's here, 17th place. We now move into the 4th round of the game, which is where it gets really interesting, because now we get to talk about the Villains tribe finally. So the heroes finally win immunity. Don't exactly know what challenge it was. It's not written down, but yeah, the villains lose and have to go to their first tribal. And this villains tribe is probably the strongest tribe in Haddonfield Survivor history, like strategy-wise. Like, some of these are really good players. Obviously, we have Sam and Harry, but the rest of them, well, and Ted too, the rest of them are pretty good. So, going into this tribe, there's a lot of tension because Will and Cyrus probably agreed to work together again. However, because of the events of last season, they were definitely ready to cut each other's throats already. You got Max on this tribe, the best player so far. Well, I thought he was the best player, and he had a big target on his back. And he's back here with Ben, who he outsmarted last time, who obviously wants revenge. And then, Cyrus and Will know Max is really good, so there's a lot of tension in that whole group. However, it seems that all the major strategists, the big players, agreed to stay together for a little bit. I think they knew that by taking each other out, they were going to be screwing over everyone because they didn't stand a chance at getting to the end on their own, so they needed, these other shields in. I think there was also some sort of sentiment of, there were some players that weren't that good, and they didn't want the undeserving players to get too far, so they sort of agreed to stay together. Well, at least, Ben, Cyrus, Will, Max, and Mary agree to stay together. Oshin is also sort of with this group. I mean, he has a good relationship with Mary, develops a good relationship with Ben, honestly. They're, kind of a duo. But yeah, that's kind of the core group on this tribe. Now, the outliers, of course, are Ted and Harry and Sam. And they're the villains that are more just villains. They're not really that good at the game, so I think that's why they were not seen as big threats. And that's why this core group of threats wants to target them. Some of these threats also may have been aware of the fact that, Elliot and Ian were running the other tribe, and I'm assuming they would have thought Sam and Ted would have joined them, so getting rid of them might have been a good strategy. But yeah, this tribal's not too interesting, but the villain dynamics overall are pretty interesting, so this tribe is basically a Cold War. I mean, that group of 5/6, while they're together here and they know that keeping shields in is good, they're ready to start the war because they want to be the one that defeats the other really good players, and a lot of them have previous tension from previous seasons. But yes, they do agree to stay together for this tribal, and it ends up being kind of boring. So, well, before we actually get to the votes, first of all, the two idols in this tribe, as I said, there's a regular idol in both tribes, and then there's the hero and villain idol. Both of them were probably found by this point on this tribe. Cyrus finds the regular one. Will finds the special villains idol. And the special villains idol just basically is a regular idol with a steal a vote included, where you get to steal someone's vote and you get to cast it for them. But yeah, those don't come into effect for a little while. But yeah, everyone decides to vote for Sam. Even Ted and Harry are in on this. I mean, it made sense. It was just the easy vote. Sam votes for Will. Sam goes home 8-1, and he doesn't do that much on this tribe. I mean, granted, Sam wasn't really put in a good position. He only had Ted. And these other people, with them agreeing to the stalemate at this point in the game, he really had no shot. And he's not that good of a player, so it makes sense why he went home here, but not much to say about him. Okay, so going into this next round, there's a bit of a twist that happens this round, and it's actually a twist that happens in, the actual show Survivors Heroes vs. Villains season. So basically, the tribes are not merged or anything. We're still in the tribe phase of the game, but during this round, both tribes are going to go to tribal council, and one person from each tribe is going to have individual immunity. So yeah, so the challenge here is finding like coins and trying to get like a specific amount. It doesn't really matter. Evan wins immunity on the heroes. Will wins immunity on the villains. But whatever the system was, I don't really remember. The heroes do better, so they get to go to tribal second. So the villains have to go first. And yeah, going into this tribal, I mean, the stalemate is still in place. They're going to target Ted and Harry because A, Mary wants to target them because they don't get along. And B, it just makes sense for the stalemate. I mean, Ted and Harry could join up with like Ian or Elliot maybe. They're also like not that good of players, so I think this group wanted to get rid of people like that. And I mean, they see Ted as a little bit of a bigger threat, so he becomes the target here, especially because that's what Mary wants. But yeah, Harry votes for Mary. Ted votes for Cyrus. I guess he was actually trying to play the game and thought Cyrus was a threat, which he is, but no one was going to listen to that with this stalemate in place. But yeah, everyone else votes for Ted also. Ted goes home. Again, same with Sam. He didn't really have that much of a chance on this tribe. With that stalemate in place, like, they were going to vote him out as long as they lost some challenges, and he didn't really have that much of a chance. At least he tries, but not a great player. He's Ted, so yeah. We now move into the heroes tribe part of this. So, obviously Evan has immunity. Samir's still isolated. With Isaac gone and Evan having immunity, I mean, the only possible person he could pitch to that group is like Chris, maybe Caleb. But at this point, with Ted and Sam going home, it really does seem like the other tribe is being dominated by that class of 22 group, so that makes Samir even more of a threat to like Elliot and Ian. So he really has no shot. And honestly, like, part of that's not his fault. And also, they did just lose a ton of challenges, so Samir would have survived had the heroes just won one more challenge. So pretty unfortunate for him. He does try to pitch Chris, as Chris is like kind of a big threat. However, it starts to be pretty clear that that's not actually going to work. Before tribal, I'll mention that Elliot finds the heroes tribe, like the regular one, not obviously Evan had the special one. But yeah, Samir votes for Chris votes for Samir. Obviously Chris has a good relationship with Caleb and then Jane, and he's in that group basically, so Samir has no chance here. They vote out Samir. And this actually kind of sucks because, Samir is relegated to like Cyrus's worst twin. Like, he's not actually that good at the game, but I actually think that's like a little bit unfair to Samir. He just kind of had a bad draw this turn. Like, he played pretty well. I mean, the fact that Isaac goes home before him and he's not targeted before Jason or Evan, pretty good, honestly. And he does some pretty good work in becoming the last person to be targeted from that group. So, it's not all bad. And if they hadn't lost all these challenges, he probably would have made it further into the game, and I have no idea what would have happened then. So overall, kind of underrated, kind of unfortunate that this is all we get to see from Samir, but yeah, decent player. Alright, so we are now at the tribe swap. So going into this tribe swap, kind of like Season 3, like, people really didn't want to be swapped onto a tribe with mostly people from the other tribe, because obviously that hero group, like Elliot, Ian, Jane, Evan, Chris, I mean, all of them, honestly, they're all together. They don't want to be put with the villains. And that villains tribe alliance, like, I don't know how solid of an alliance it was, but I kind of get the impression that they wanted to stay loyal at least to the merge. So if you're one of the heroes, you definitely don't want to be swapped with, like, mostly the villains, especially because the villains are kind of scary players, honestly. A lot of them are pretty good. But yeah, here's the draw. So, drawing blue, we have Ian and Evan, who are from the original heroes. They're joined by mostly villains. We get Ben, Cyrus, Max, and Will, who are all together, mostly. So that's a pretty bad draw for Ian and Evan. Over on the red tribe, we have Oshin and Mary, who are the only villains, and they get put with Caleb, Jane, Elliot, and Chris. Now, this isn't as bad of a situation for Oshin and Mary because they do sort of have a relationship with, like, Caleb and Jane at least. Probably Elliot, too. So, It actually probably is worse for Elliot, mostly Chris, but also Elliot. Like, spoiler alert, this tribe doesn't go to tribal council, but had they gone to tribal council, I'm not exactly sure what would have happened. Like, possibly Oshin could have gone home, but I also think it's pretty likely that they just target Chris, but I don't know if Elliot would have tried to protect him. He had the idol. I don't know, but this tribe doesn't go to tribal council. Unfortunately for the blue tribe, and especially unfortunate for Evan and Ian, the blue tribe loses the next couple challenges. So this first challenge is the golf challenge, pretty common one at this point in Head Survivor history. Red wins, blue loses. Harry gets to skip this round, which was just like a random draw, and he'll join the blue tribe after they vote someone out. So this tribal's not too interesting. I mean, the Villain Alliance is staying strong at this point. I mean, I think the plan was for them to stay strong till the merge, hopefully. However, there are some relationships here. I mean, Ben and Evan are kind of friends, and Evan obviously wants to get rid of Max, and Ben does want to get rid of Max at some point. So the two of them, could have tried to get rid of Max. However, Ian is not going to try to get rid of Max, so, and Ian and Evan are not really going to work together, so it's not looking super good for both Ian and Evan, especially because Will and Cyrus not ready to quite pull the trigger on each other yet, and they have a lot of say over this tribe, and I don't think Max is too keen on keeping Evan and Ben in together, so it's not looking super great. So because Max wants to get rid of Evan, and Ian is trying to make himself seem loyal to Max, I mean, Ben might have wanted Ian out, however, the rest of them just listen to Max here, and Evan's gonna get voted out. And Evan does end up voting for Ben here, which I'm pretty sure is, because he knew he was going home, and he was mad that Ben wasn't, trying to keep him, doing more work for it, but the writing was on the walls. Ian was gonna do a better job at trying to stay, but really, the heroes were screwed here, because the villains weren't ready to start attacking each other yet. But yeah, we lose Evan, who doesn't get to do much this season. He kind of doesn't do a whole lot. I mean, he's in the majority on the original heroes, not doing a whole lot. Gets swap screwed, basically. Yeah, he's not a good enough player to have pulled himself out of it. That's pretty much it for Evan. Jumping right into the next round, I mean, the red tribe wins immunity again. I will mention that Elliot finds a special, secret 5th idol. Crazy that there were 5 idols pre-merge here. The super idol, which can be played on 2 people, but unlike the hero idol, that one of those 2 people can be yourself. So Elliot has 2 idols, one of them being a super idol, which is pretty ridiculous. And I'm pretty sure Chris knew about these idols. Chris and Elliot were pretty close at this point in the game. But yeah, going into the heroes tribal, it's not super interesting. I mean, Cyrus and Will, pretty much the middle of the tribe. Max may have wanted to keep Ian in. They had a good relationship. However, with that villain truce still in play, there wasn't really a chance of anyone else going home. I mean, Harry could have gone home, I guess, but, he's Harry. Why would you vote Harry out? He sucks. Also, this is kind of where the war for pawns start, because obviously the villains know they're going to start trying to get rid of each other. I mean, they want to know who's the best strategist here, so Cyrus does a pretty good job at making Harry basically his pawn, because, I mean, Harry was Max's pawn in Season 3, but he pretty much becomes Cyrus's pawn at this point. Obviously, Ben wants to get rid of Max at some point and prove that, he can outplay Max. However, the other proxy war between Will and Cyrus is interesting because they both have a decent relationship with Max. However, it does seem like Will and Max was really the bigger alliance. I think Max and Cyrus were a little bit more wary of each other. So I think the fact that Will and Max let Ian go here is probably a knock against their game. They probably should have let Harry go. However, there's also a chance that, they didn't know they were going to lose all these challenges, so that's understandable, and they wanted to have all these villains in the game. But yeah, 5-1, Ian goes home. He votes for Ben, because, Ben's against Max, and Ian was trying really hard to get Max on his side. It just wasn't going to work with that villain truce. So yeah, Ian gets swap screwed. He plays pretty good on the Heroes tribe. He has Chris on his side. They get rid of a lot of those Class of 22 people, but, you know, that's the nature. Sometimes he gets swap screwed. Pretty unfortunate for him, but yeah. Alright, so we're now at the final round before the merge. So, this challenge, pretty ridiculous. This was the disgusting food eating challenge, which I did for the special All-Star season. I made them eat like a whole apple, including the core, and then like part of a stick of butter. It was ridiculous, but Ben was terrible. Cyrus didn't do super well.
Go! Eat it! It's what leads the most. Eat it! I won! I'm not eating that. Will. Oh, what the fuck? Ooh, I won. Well, your team loses. We won!
Yeah, the blue tribe lost again. And there's only villains left on the blue tribe, so they absolutely have to start going for each other here. So Cyrus is not going to vote out Harry. He wants Harry as his minion. Ben wants to vote out Max. Cyrus and Will are against each other. However, Will is kind of with Max, so I think Cyrus wasn't exactly ready to get rid of Will, and with Ben pushing for Max at this point, I mean, there's not really another option on this tribe. Like, he kind of has to start making that move on Max, especially because I'm sure Cyrus wanted to make that move on Max eventually, knowing that Max was like the other really good winner here. And Max is kind of screwed here, because yeah, he's done good work and he has Will, but Cyrus has already won Harry over, so with Ben really going after him, like, he's kind of fucked. Like, maybe he could have gotten them to vote for Will, but like, Ben was really after him, so it ends up being 2-3. With Max going home, 2 votes for Ben. Maybe they tried to get Harry to vote for Ben, but yeah. Let's talk about Max, because, you know, Max is an interesting player. He played a really good game on Season 3, obviously. And, honestly, I have no idea who thought of the truce idea on the villain's side, but it was a really good idea for someone like Max, who was such a big threat coming into this game. But, I mean, I will knock him, obviously, for, like, not strategically positioning himself well enough. He clearly had some sort of deal with Will, which was good, but he should have probably had a better idea with Cyrus. I know Cyrus was so excited to start flipping on Max and Will, but he should have tried to, like, rein him in a little bit more. But yeah, this round was pretty hard because, you know, to do that he would have had to convince Cyrus to get rid of one of his pawns and Harry or Ben, so it was going to be difficult. And I also won't fault him too hard, because, like, them losing 3 challenges in this point in the game, like, pretty unlucky, honestly. So, and he was well positioned on the original villains. Like, even despite the truce, like, he was pretty good with, like, Mary and O'Sheen. Like, he was the one who was closest to Ted, probably. But yeah, he lets Ted go. So, I mean, the game's pretty mixed. It's a little bit unlucky, honestly, and he had such a big target on his back, so, like, you can't really blame him for getting voted out here, and he makes it almost halfway, so pretty good showing, honestly, for someone with this big of a threat on him. But yeah, with that we go into the merge, and this merge is really interesting, because we enter the merge with mostly villains still in the game. I mean, you got Mary, Cyrus, Will, and O'Sheen and Ben, all of whom are, like, sort of loosely together. I mean, Cyrus has started to pick up some of his, like, minions, like Harry. Ben's honestly one of them. But there's a lot of tension still. Like, Will and Cyrus, we know are going to flip on each other at some point. And just generally, like, all of these villains know, like, they want to get each other out, because they want to get to the end with some of these, like, lesser players, so that they can be the one that wins really easily. So, honestly, players like Jane or Caleb, just because they've made it this far, like, they're kind of safe now, because, like, who's going to vote them out? Now, this doesn't really apply to Elliot and Chris, who were controlling the original Heroes tribe, so obviously, assuming the villains do stay together a little bit, like, these two are going to be big targets, honestly. But yeah, I'm sure most of the villains thought, like, oh, once we get rid of, like, Elliot or Chris or both of them, then, you know, it's time to start the war. But yeah, Elliot and Chris don't have too many relationships. I mean, they obviously are good with Jane and Caleb, but that's not really much. So, going into this round, the villains do plan on mostly staying together. I mean, Will was out on the max vote, but he has all these other relationships. Like, obviously, he's good with Jane and Mary and stuff. So, like, the villains aren't just going to drop Will. Obviously, Oshin and Ben are sort of together. So, Oshin's kind of in a weird spot here because you kind of have the Ben Cyrus wing and then the, Will Mary wing. But yeah, anyway, the challenge here, planking. 2 winners, and Chris gets redemption. Chris gets to win immunity. Jane also wins immunity. And yeah, I mean, with the villains staying together here, there's one pretty obvious target for them to latch onto, and that's Elliot, obviously. Pretty sure that no one other than Chris knew about his 2 idols. And this is really interesting. So, the villains do plan on splitting the votes. They want to split between Caleb and Elliot, just in case Elliot, or I guess Caleb, have an idol. However, Chris has told me after this that he actually wanted Elliot to go home here because with the 2 idols gone and with Elliot gone, he could then slip under the radar. He wouldn't be as big of a threat, and I guess he probably assumed that the villains were going to start cannibalizing each other, which is obviously what does happen, but I don't know. This is a questionable strategy. It's a little bit like, first of all, I don't know how true it is, and second of all, like, letting your closest ally with 2 idols go home is kind of strange strategy. I'm not totally out on the move if it's true, but, like, it's a little bit shaky. I'm not exactly sure how to feel about it. But yeah, according to Chris, he tried to make Elliot feel comfortable so he wouldn't play his idols. But yeah, they split the votes. Harry, Will, Mary, and Jane vote for Elliot. Ben, Cyrus, and Oshin vote for Caleb. So we got a 4-3 vote, so it doesn't really matter what the other 3 do. They all vote for Ben because, everyone likes voting for Ben. Elliot does not play either of his idols, which is stupid and doesn't make any sense. But Elliot was also distracted at this point. He had other stuff going on outside of the game. But yeah, I'm still going to knock him a lot for this move. But yeah, we lose Elliot, who plays really well. He finds 2 idols, makes a good alliance with Chris, controls the Heroes tribe, and then just goes out in a whimper here. I mean, he's a huge threat. He's an easy consensus boot for the Villains Alliance. He doesn't play his idols, which is bad, but most of his game is honestly good before that, so honestly better than his Season 4 game, even though he doesn't get nearly as far. But yeah, that's Elliot. Let's move on. So we've reached the point in the game where the game gets really interesting. So it's at this point that we're going to see the Villains Tribe Alliance implode on each other, which this actually happens a little bit too early probably for most of these players, and that's why it doesn't end up working out for any of them, honestly. But the challenge here is the Frisbee Challenge. Cyrus wins immunity. So going into the tribal, I mean, obviously Chris and, kind of Caleb are the heroes. They're on the bottom. But, no one sees Chris or Caleb as threats. They're not really a priority to go home. So the villains start eyeing each other up. So obviously Will and Cyrus want to come after each other. I mean, that's what happened last season. And it ended good for Cyrus, not for Will. So both of them obviously still want to do that this time. But with Cyrus having immunity here, Will can't go for Cyrus, so he wants to go for Ben as the backup because, Ben's with Cyrus, Ben got rid of Max, and obviously Will has Mary and Jane pretty locked down. They're kind of a trio, and they sort of have Caleb, kind of. Cyrus has Harry. Cyrus also obviously has Ben. And then Oshin is kind of in a weird spot here because he's with the Will Mary group, however, he doesn't like Will, and he does like Ben, so he's not going to put up Ben. If it was Cyrus, it might have been a different story, but with the target of the Will group being Ben, a little bit more questionable what's going to happen. So kind of the swing votes here become Caleb and Chris, honestly, and Will's group actually succeeds this round at getting them on their side, which won't last, and part of that might be motivated by the fact that Ben's super sketchy, and people just don't trust him. So at this point, it's pretty clear that the Ben group is going to lose and the Will group is going to probably win out. I mean, technically, Cyrus, Ben, Harry, and O'Sheen makes up like a little bit under half, but they realize they're not going to get those other numbers. So Cyrus sees this, and he's not going to play the idol on Ben or anything, so he lets Ben go home, and we can get into the votes now. So Will, Mary, Jane, and Caleb all vote for Ben. Harry, O'Sheen, and Ben vote for Will. Cyrus and Chris are a little bit more up in the air, and actually at this point, Cyrus and Chris are kind of starting to bond, which is very important. Because yes, Cyrus is letting Ben go home here. Him and Chris are going to vote Ben out. But I think some sort of talks happened here where Cyrus realized, oh, I have an idol. I think I could pick up Chris, and possibly through that maybe Caleb. So losing Ben isn't actually the end of the world. However, I still think it's kind of a bad move to let Ben go home here. I mean, why not just vote out Will? Will also had the idol, and he was paranoid that Cyrus and probably Chris were going to flip on him. So he couldn't have gotten Will out here because Will plays the idol despite only getting 3 votes. And obviously it's a villain idol, so he can negate a vote, which is Harry's, and he votes twice for Ben. But yeah, Ben goes home. So we can talk about Ben, who he was a little trigger happy on this season. He was really excited to start getting rid of people like Max and Will. And he's just Ben. He's so sketchy. Like, people didn't want to work with him. Obviously, he makes a good relationship with O'Sheen. He's in with Cyrus. He doesn't play bad by any means, but he also doesn't play, like, particularly well. So yeah, we can move on to the final 8, where Cyrus is starting to build his army against Will. So he pretty much has Chris at this point. He obviously has Harry. With Ben gone, he doesn't really have O'Sheen. I mean, O'Sheen's with Mary and Jane, so he's kind of losing to the Will group. If he can pull in Caleb, who Caleb should just be with Mary and Jane, but for some reason Caleb was pretty loyal to Chris, so there was actually a chance that Cyrus would be able to pick him up. But despite that, that would still be 4-4. But this ends up being a really wild round, probably one of the better ones of the game. And for a while, I didn't even understand what happened this round. Like, it took a lot of asking around and studying the votes and studying this game to really realize what happened here. So, first of all, the challenge was the auction, which isn't really a challenge, but yeah. A lot of people got some dumb prizes. Mary got an extra vote. Jane won immunity. But yeah, as you can see here, Cyrus is losing. It's 5-3. And everyone on that right side knows that Cyrus is the biggest threat. Now, they also don't know he has the idol. So this vote actually is really confusing, so I'm going to try to break it down. So as far as I'm aware, that side on the right, the Will side, wanted to split the votes. They wanted to split the votes between Cyrus and Chris, because obviously Harry doesn't matter. But obviously they only have 5 people. So, through his relationships with Caleb and Jane, that right side was trying to pull Chris back onto their side to be one of the votes for Cyrus, while they were also still splitting the votes on him. And this plan would have worked. It would have been 3 votes Chris, 3 votes Cyrus, 2 votes for, probably Will. They probably assumed Will was getting the votes. However, Cyrus makes a big play here, and it actually probably might have been Chris that did this. I mean, Chris does vote for Cyrus here. He is part of the split vote. However, it's unclear whether or not Chris was just putting up a facade for that Will Mary side, or if he legitimately flipped on Cyrus here. I would side towards that he's putting on a facade because, first of all, he rejoins Cyrus after this round, and second of all, something crazy happens this tribal, and I think he might be responsible for it, and that is that Caleb flips on this group and votes for Will with Cyrus and Harry. So Chris still votes for Cyrus, and Cyrus has to play his idol, which I think Chris might have done this also to flush Cyrus' idol. I don't know if he knew about that. But yeah, with them not having Caleb, the split vote's not going to work. So Will goes home, which sucks for Will, and we can talk about Will. So this vote's a mess, but I mean, Will was a really good player on this season. Yes, he wastes his idol when he doesn't have to, but I mean, he knew Cyrus was a really good player, so it's understandable to be a little bit afraid of what he could do. But other than that, I mean, once again, he does get outplayed by Cyrus here. I mean, yes, he gets rid of Ben, but he does lose Max to Cyrus, and I mean, obviously Cyrus outplays him this round by stealing Caleb over, and he didn't really have Chris's loyalty too much, so, I mean, it's a rocky game. I mean, the beginning's good, and he had a lot of numbers behind him, and he was really good at thinking of strategic plans, and had this wonky vote actually worked out in his favor, and he got Cyrus or Chris out this round, I mean, he probably wasn't going to win. He's Will. Like, who's going to vote for him at the end? But he would have gotten pretty far and would have played a really good game. So despite him getting 8th place, I mean, pretty impressive game. At the final 7 round, it really seemed like Chris was back with Cyrus and Harry. So that, again, that's why I think that Chris, like, was in on all the plans of the last round, because he just immediately goes back to Cyrus. But yeah, Caleb is kind of the middle player now, because Chris is trying to pull on him, but Mary and Jane are also trying to pull on him, and I guess he just doesn't know really what to do. Caleb's Caleb. He's always such an interesting player, because he usually matters a lot to these votes, but, like, he's never directing anything, and he never gets any respect for anything, but what are you gonna do? Anyway, the challenge here is the one about, like, questions about all of your fellow cast members. Yeah, and Jane wins immunity. She knows everyone better. And yeah, this is about the point of the game where it starts going downhill. A lot of people complained about this season. They think that the end game is really underwhelming. And I kind of disagree with that. I mean, I agreed at the time. But some of the end game stuff is really impressive. And, like, it's really an exciting part of the game. I mean, yes, it's underwhelming that all the really good players don't win. But I don't think the endgame's all that bad. However, this is bad. So O'Sheen quits the game, which is kind of underwhelming because anyone quitting sucks. But O'Sheen was a likely winner, honestly, at this point. He was playing super well, and we can just talk about him now. I mean, he had a good relationship with Ben. He was really well positioned on the villains, despite, like, not being in that group originally. He plays a pretty good social game, and he's well positioned. He's a very likely winner, so it's unfortunate that he quits here. And also, it kind of screws over his side of the numbers, as now, even with Caleb, there's only 3 of them. So, going into the rest of the round, I mean, that side is targeting Cyrus. He's the biggest threat. The other side's targeting Mary, who's the biggest threat, I guess. I mean, Jane has immunity also, so they can't vote for her. But yeah, Caleb does end up siding with Mary and Jane, but I think that's also just because Mary had the extra vote, so he knew that it was possible to get Cyrus out here, and yeah, he does get Cyrus out, so let's talk about Cyrus. So this is where it gets underwhelming. I mean, everyone wanted Cyrus to be rewarded here, and Cyrus plays an amazing game, despite the fact that he was the previous winner. He gets all the way to 6th place, and has a very good shot at winning if he's able to get past this round. I mean, had Caleb just sided with him, and he gets Mary out here, I mean, I do think Chris would have tried to get rid of him. However, I think Cyrus could have won out. And even if he didn't win out, he had Harry. So it's possible that he could have gotten to the end and won again, which is crazy. And I mean, before that, he was playing a really good game. He gets rid of Max. He lets Ben go, which is a little bit of a misguided move. And he's a little too excited to start making moves and probably makes them a little too early. However, I don't really blame him. He's Cyrus. He wants to make all those big moves, so you can't just, like, cage him. You gotta let him do it. But yeah, really fun game, really good game. Now we're at the final 5, and at this point, both of the leaders of the 2 sides, Will and Cyrus, plus another one of the big players, O'Sheen, are already gone. So this is why the endgame is sometimes considered underwhelming, because a lot of the lesser names are the ones who made it this far. And yeah, I mean, that is the fault of those players. Like, Will and Cyrus were too eager to start attacking each other, like, too early in this game. They should have waited a little bit. But what are you gonna do? But yeah, Chris and Harry are losing this round. I mean, now the other side has the numbers. However, Chris wins immunity in that balancing challenge, and Harry finds the merge idol. So, they're good. They're gonna win out here. There's no way they could possibly go home. Which is also underwhelming because, like, you know, immunities and idols, like, it's not really strategic gameplay. So seeing them get out of it through that is, like, a little bit lame. But yeah, I mean, obviously Caleb's not going to vote for himself, and Mary and Jane are going to vote for him. So he's going to vote for Mary, and Mary's going to go home. And it really seems like at this point that Chris kind of positioned himself really well. I mean, Jane is a big threat. He has Harry, and he kind of has Caleb. And Harry and Caleb, as we know, are mega goats. So I think Chris gets shit on way too hard for this game, but we'll get to that. So the final 4 round we can kind of blow through. So the challenge was bocce ball. Chris wins immunity, and yeah, there's not really a question here. Yes, Caleb and Jane could have voted out Harry. However, why would you vote out Harry? And Jane is so clearly going to win if she gets to the end against any of these people. You just have to vote her out. Like, Caleb probably thought there was a chance he could have won against Chris, which, I mean, it wasn't out of the realm of possibilities. But yeah, we lose Jane here, and she wins if she gets to the end. She wins against Chris, Harry, and Caleb, probably Mary too. She was a pretty big jury threat, and actually, I think she played a pretty good game. I mean, she's still not very active, but she's a really good social and physical player, so, you know, pretty decent. Alright, now we get to Final Tribal, which was so fun. Everyone shits on the end game of this season, but yes, this Final Tribal was a mess, but that's why it's so fun. Like, everyone was so mad that Chris, Caleb, and Harry were the final 3, which doesn't even make sense because I think Chris actually played a good game. But everyone was mad that they didn't make it to the end. They were mad that, like, the really big players like Cyrus and Will, even Mary or Max, weren't there. There was just a lot of bitterness to go around. So, yeah. Going into it, I think Chris gives a really good speech. He outlines how he, like, positioned himself as a secondary threat to hide the fact that he was actually doing a lot of stuff. He talks about getting rid of Elliot, getting rid of the idols, hiding behind Cyrus. And I think he wins over a lot of the votes during this tribal. And Harry loses votes at Final Tribal. So yeah, I should also mention that O'Sheen's not on the jury because he quit, and quitters don't get to be on the jury. But yeah, going into tribal, Jane and Mary are really anti-Chris. I mean, I think they're just bitter that Chris got rid of them at the end, and it wasn't, like, good gameplay. It was just him winning immunity, which is fair, I guess, but, like, Caleb definitely didn't play a better game. But yeah, they're gonna vote for Caleb. Ian and Elliot worked with Chris. They respected Chris's game. They're gonna vote for Chris. Evan and Ben wanted to vote for Harry. However, Harry kind of ruins that by being a mess at Final Tribal, and they start leaning towards Chris. And then Max, Will, and Cyrus, the big 3, I mean, they're unhappy about all the options, but I mean, they know Chris played better, so, you know, Chris is going to get all their votes. The only 2 votes he doesn't end up getting are Mary and Jane, who are really bitter. But yeah, let's talk about the final 3, and first off, we have Harry, who plays terribly. He gets 3rd this season, not 2nd, and yeah, I mean, he's not as actively bad, I guess, but he's just a follower. He follows Cyrus throughout most of the game. He's not good socially. He's not well respected. He's not doing a whole lot actively. He didn't have any chance of winning. He was going to lose to everyone, so he kind of sucks. And next up we have Caleb. Kind of weird that we have the same 2 losing finalists as Season 3, but I guess everyone just knows Caleb and Harry suck. But yeah, Caleb plays okay. I mean, he plays actively. He does flip between the sides, and he tries to get rid of all the big threats. And I think he does actively go to this final 3, knowing that Chris is not as well respected as some of the other ones. So I guess that's good. He was in the majority early on. There's not a whole lot bad to say about his game. He's just not well respected and not super active, so he was never going to win. But yeah. And finally, let's talk about Chris, who is so hated after this season. Like, everyone was so mad that Chris won this game. They're like, Chris isn't really an all-star. He didn't actually play that well. Now, it is debatable whether or not he was an all-star coming in here, but he plays a really good game on this season. It still has flaws, and I don't think it's like a top tier win. However, first of all, it was really fun to watch. And so, starting off with the original tribe, he's in the middle. He's flip-flopping between the 2 sides. He is well-positioned. He makes a good alliance with Caleb, a good alliance with Ian and Elliot, people he doesn't really know very well. So that's pretty impressive. He was well respected by the class of 22 people, and he was never targeted on the hero tribe despite them losing a bunch of challenges and him being a big threat. He knows about both of Elliot's idols and gets them out of the game, and strategically does that so that he becomes less of a threat and can just hide while the villains go to war with each other. He makes a good relationship with Cyrus. He uses Cyrus as a shield actively. He's able to flip Caleb on his closest allies just so that he can get rid of Will. Cyrus then goes home, which isn't like what he wants to have happen. He wants to keep Cyrus for an extra round, but I mean, the only reason Cyrus even goes home is because of an extra vote. But regardless, yeah. He does have to win out in those last 2 rounds. He does win the last 2 immunity challenges. However, while that is a knock against his game, it's not like the most ridiculous thing in the world, especially because he's a big guy, and he probably was banking on the fact that he could win these challenges. But still minorly a knock, because if he lost any of these 2 challenges, he was going home. I will also knock him because the jury didn't really like him. Like, they respected him more than Harry and Caleb, however, they weren't, like, excited to vote for him, so I'll knock him for that, too. His endgame is a little spotty, however, I find his game really impressive. Like, it's definitely an upper middle tier win, honestly. And so underrated. Everyone was so angry about this. Like, this season is so overhated. But yeah, that's the season. And yeah, like I said, overhated season. It was really fun to have all these all-stars here. The theme was fun. There was crazy gameplay. Yes, the players that weren't as well-known get to the end, but Chris plays really well. And along the way, there was a lot of exciting gameplay. That early merge section of the game, from like the Elliot boot to the Will boot, is crazy. Just a really fun season, in my opinion. Like, maybe it's not the best season in the world, and it could have been better, but it was really good, honestly. And yeah, here's my rankings. So, Sam played poorly, Ted played poorly, Isaac played actively poorly, Jason didn't really do a whole lot. I have Evan kind of high despite being the first boot. I mean, he finds an idol, and he only is voted out because he plays it poorly. Evan M plays pretty passively and doesn't get to do much. Samir actually plays pretty good despite being an early boot. I mean, he survives a lot of tribals and positions himself kind of well. Harry plays really bad. He's really low despite being a finalist. Yeah, then we have Ben and Ian, who were well positioned early on. But yeah, Ben blows up his spot by like being too aggressive in the game and by being too sketchy. Ian just kind of gets swap screwed. Then we have Caleb, who plays poorly and passively. After that, we have Max, who gets a pretty bad swap, and it's unfortunate that they lost a bunch of challenges, but he played really well early on and had good relationships with people like Will. Then we have Elliot, same thing, played really good early on, but just entered the merge in a really bad spot. After that, we have Will, who plays really well, but just makes his moves a little too early and was a little too paranoid. Then we have Jane and Mary, who come very close to winning. Both of them almost win, and they were sort of active, but not like the most strategically aggressive players, but they were well positioned and good socially. Then I have the winner in Chris at third, who I think plays really impressively. However, he wasn't the best, his endgame wasn't great, and he wasn't super well respected. He had to win out, but he was a pretty scrappy player and made some pretty impressive plays, and was really good socially despite being pretty unconnected. Oshin is in second. He wasn't super active, however, he was really well positioned, really good socially, a huge threat to win. It's unfortunate that he quits. And then I have Cyrus at number 1 again. I mean, he gets 6th place, but he strategically controls the game up to that point and is only eliminated by an extra vote. Like, he should have made it to the final 5, and at that point, he would have been a pretty dominant winner despite already being a dominant winner, which is crazy. Yeah, he controls the original villains tribe, he controls the swap tribe, he controls some of the early votes, he gets rid of Will. I mean, pretty good game, honestly. He's easily number 1. But there we go, that's Season 5, Heroes vs. Villains. Pretty divisive season, pretty messy one, but a really exciting All-Star season, and I think it's overhated. I think it's actually really fun, but yeah, that's it for the season.
No! 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 Jason, no! Ted felt excluded, so he's getting his own. No!